Welcome to Podsauce. I'm Dax Holt.
I am Alicia Renee. We are your podcast discovery show.
All right, we're going to get right into it. We got Natalie Barbu, who has the podcast The Real Reel, which is a podcast basically going behind the Instagram reel. That is the whole idea behind the title. You go beyond what people are putting out there, and you get their real perspective from entrepreneurs, investors, influencers, kind of everyone out there. And she is diving deep into their life. And Natalie, I hope I did you justice by that little explanation of the podcast. How are you?
Good. And yes, you explained it perfectly. I wanted to, social media is your highlight reel. So this podcast is the real reel. So you did a great job.
Nice. So, I was listening to an episode that you had the other day with Jessica, the CEO of Simply Be. And
yeah, that was one of my favorites.
It's funny because it's a whole marketing company. She owns this marketing company and PR, and the whole concept of it is be yourself, because that is what's resonating the most with people out there. So Natalie, when you got this podcast, is that your whole mantra too? Just be yourself and people gravitate towards it?
Yeah, definitely be yourself. But I also think share your experiences and be transparent and, don't shy away from showing real stuff rather than just trying to show your successes and, and everything great. It's okay to be vulnerable behind the scenes.
It's such a fine line, though, between obviously wanting to play the analytical game with Instagram so that you can get your likes and your clicks and all of these other things, but also, Natalie, what you were saying, create a space of authenticity. So what do you think is the happy medium to still bring in the traffic? And has that been discussed in an episode on the show, because it is a podcast discovery show, to find that happy medium space?
Yeah, so I personally think having, sharing your journey, whatever you're going through, is the best way to still fall into the algorithm, because you're showing the behind the scenes, but then you also get to show your successes too. And so you get to show the pretty side and the good side, but then also your journey throughout the whole experience. And I have quite a few episodes with some influencers where we talk about that a lot. I know I had Mariana Hewitt on the show. She was one where we talked a lot about her journey as an influencer and how she shared she was very vulnerable with her followers, and it kind of got them to trust her. We talk all about social media in that episode. But yeah, a ton of influencers that I've had on that have had success have said very similar things of you have to share the in-between. You can't just share the good parts only.
And I think that's what I took away from that episode, because I personally struggle. You don't always want to let people in on the darker side or not the exciting side. And so listening to that episode with Jessica, I was like, you know what? I think that is really good advice for people out there that want to grow their social following or just want that authentic view for people. And so that's kind of what I took away from it personally.
What advice would you give, Natalie, actually for someone who's trying to navigate the waters of, I have such a love-hate relationship with Instagram.
Mostly hate, some love.
Mostly hate. A dash of love. Full disclosure. Especially in this day and age where everyone is, like you stated earlier, just posting their highlight reel, not necessarily going deep and being real. How do you suggest someone navigate that space? They have such a love-hate relationship with social media. Obviously, in this day and age, when it comes to branding, people are getting jobs as actors off of using their Instagram. How do you suggest people navigate that water?
Yeah, I think one thing is to only follow people that make you happy or that give you inspiration or that don't make you feel bad about yourself or, jealousy or comparison. Because once you start looking at Instagram and feeling inspired when you go on it, I think then you'll have inspiration of what you can post too. But if you're only following people that make you upset, that make you, feel bad about yourself, which we all do, if we're being honest, then I think that's where you'll turn the page. You won't like it if when you go on it, you automatically become unhappier or, compare yourself and pit yourself against someone else. So I would say it starts with who you're following, because then you can get inspiration for what you're posting on your own social media feed.
And Natalie, you've done over 200 episodes of this podcast. You've had a lot of influencers, business owners, entrepreneurs. if someone was to come to you for the first time, what would be that episode that you're like, this one was so good, anyone could take away something from listening to this episode? What would that episode be?
Honestly, the one that you had mentioned was great. The one with Jessica, Jessica Zweig. Hers was incredible. I think hers was just very inspiring. Another one that I really loved is Adina's Jewels. She came on the show.
I just listened to that episode too.
Yeah.
Good.
She was awesome because it really shows, how hard work and like perseverance can really pay off when it comes to creating a business and kind of creating a life for yourself. And so I think a lot of times people view success as like, oh my God, it's an overnight success or an instant success. Like, oh, they just blew up out of nowhere. But her episode really shows the behind the scenes of like, oh no, it's not like that. You start in your parents' kitchen, starting your business and running your business, and you can't hang out with your friends, and you have to put in all your money, and you're not making any money for a long period of time. And then finally someone gives you, a break. Like finally someone is wearing your piece and it's seen on like a celebrity, or finally you get that order that's going to like change your life, or that wholesale order that's going to change your life and your business. And so her episode, I think, was really, really cool, and it really showed the behind the scenes of
But I got a bone to pick with Adina. She was like, oh, you can start a business with no money. I did it with $100 and made you. I'm like, that is hard to start a business with
$100.
Zero money too. Like that's what she did was unbelievable. That's not common though.
Yeah, but
Totally.
I think the overarching message though was just find a way.
Yeah.
Like despite the no's and the obstacles, find a way and you can figure it out. What episode, Natalie, taught you something that you didn't know?
Oh, this is a good question. So one of my very first episodes, actually, I had one of my friends on who was a middle school teacher, which doesn't sound glamorous, doesn't sound, like, oh my God, that's a crazy job.
They're doing God's work. Are you kidding me? Middle school teacher? Whew, I bowed down.
It put things in perspective because a lot of times we highlight, founders and CEOs and people who've raised a ton of money and people who are like deemed super successful, but her story of how she decided to become a teacher, what it all entails, why she is doing what she's doing, really opened my eyes. I'm like, wow, these people are doing, like you said, God's work. And it's so much more that goes into it than just like, oh, they're just a teacher. Like they do so much. Their heart and their convictions are completely in love with like what they're doing and actually helping people out. And just she was sharing stories of like the impact that it's had in her life and the impact that she's made on other students' lives. And I thought that one really put things in perspective for me and made me learn a lot, because it's not something like I've never wanted to become a teacher. I didn't know really much besides like me being in school, and like having teachers of my own. But her episode was one that, regardless of if you care about teaching or not, is going to like teach you something, inspire you, and really make you appreciate these people.
Everyone better be caring about teaching.
Listen.
That is our future. I walked into my son's class. I mean, he's 6. And I looked at the teacher. I was like, I can barely handle one 6-year-old, and you're dealing with 30 of them.
Good luck, sis.
I will hand you everything you need. Any supplies, let me know, because I don't know.
Is she on your Christmas list?
Oh, she's on every list. Like, let us help you as much as possible, because that is amazing work.
I think one of the things that I love about your podcast, Natalie, is that you begin every episode with like speaking from your own space. What made you be comfortable enough to be vulnerable about the different aspects that you're currently navigating in your own life?
Yeah, I wanted the podcast to feel like a community, and podcasts are very one-sided. It's just the podcast host speaking to whoever's listening.
Yeah.
But I wanted people to feel like they really knew who I was, and I'm on other social media platforms, and I wanted the podcast to be a little different. I wanted it to feel like me and you were just like driving in the car together, and I'm telling you about, my life. So the goods, the bad, like the good stuff, the bad stuff, the in-between, how my week was. And I want you to be able to share that with me also off the platform. So on Instagram, on like DMs, YouTube comments, reviews, things like that. I just always wanted it to feel like you were sitting in a car with me having a conversation. And even with my episodes, like with guests, I want the person listening to feel like they're the third person in the conversation. Like it's just like they're eavesdropping in. It's not super formal. It's not very interviewee. It's more just like you caught us in a coffee shop and we're chatting. So I really just emphasize the community aspect. And that's why in order to have a community, you have to be vulnerable. You have to share your life. And so that's the reason why I wanted to start every episode with, you know, a little bit of an insight on me and getting to know the host, because I don't do that much talking when I'm interviewing. You know, I ask the question and I listen. So it's kind of my chance to get people to get to know me.
And Natalie, how has your Instagram highlight reel changed that now that you have this podcast? Because I got to imagine there's more pressure for you to even be more real in your reels.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, there is. And I've always felt like I didn't want to gatekeep anything. So with being an influencer, content creator, I never wanted to gatekeep how to become, you know, how to grow or how much money is made in this industry or how to work with brands. And so I've always been someone that's like, okay, even if I'm going to show, you know, a highlight reel, I'm always going to try to provide value and provide like behind the scenes of what I'm doing. So I've tried to use my social media less as just pretty photos and more of providing value. So how can I help someone? What are questions that I had when I was going through this? What are questions I have currently that maybe I just discovered the answer to and I can share it online? So every time I post a piece of content, I always try to think like, what type of value is this providing? Like, what can someone get out of it? And of course, I post the pretty photo now and then, but it's not that's not what I want my Instagram to be known for, and that's not why I want people to follow me.
Now, we are a podcast discovery show. What podcasts are you currently listening to, Natalie, that you can recommend to our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah, so my favorite one is How I Built This with Guy Raz. I think it's a classic.
I just recommended that one.
You
It's
did.
so good.
You did.
That is my all-time favorite. I think he does such a good job, and I'm always so inspired by his questions and the way he interviews people. I really like The Skinny Confidential as well. It's called the Him and Her podcast, and it's a husband and a wife who talk all things wellness. They talk about business, they talk lifestyle, and they really do a good job at community building. So it makes you feel like you really, really know them. And then I'd say I'm going to throw it back to a podcast from a few years ago, but it's one of my favorites that I listened to last year, and it's called the Startup Podcast. And if you want to see the behind the scenes of a startup, season 1 of the Startup Podcast is by far the best podcast I've listened to.
Awesome. And is that doing different entrepreneurs each episode, or is it one company and they're featuring it through numerous episodes?
One company. It shows you how he built his podcast company. So he actually has a podcast production company. It's called Gimlet Media.
Yeah.
If you've heard of it. And so it shows you, he's taking you through the process of how he started Gimlet Media in real time. So it was recorded in 2015, but he brings a microphone into investor meetings. He brings a microphone into conversations with his wife about, you know, his business. And so you really see the behind the scenes of a business that you do not see on social media. And it's one of the best podcasts I've listened to.
That is a great recommendation.
Dope
Thank you
sauce.
for that, Natalie. I'm absolutely going to be checking that
Natalie
one
is
out.
on her entrepreneurial tip, honey. You hear me? On it.
Well, thank you
Love to
so
see it.
much for joining us, Natalie. And for anyone that wants to check out the Real Real podcast, head on over to podsauce.com. We'll have a link there directly to, I'm going to say the Jessica episode. Jessica Zwig, I believe is how you say her last name.
Yep.
The CEO of Simply Be. Great episode. I feel like I learned a lot. And just being in social media, being an entrepreneur, I really enjoyed that episode. I think a lot of people will take something away from that.
1000%. Natalie Barbu, host of The Real Real. Thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.